We are live again. Welcome, everybody, for the second time. This is the second panel of this live stream Docker Community All Hands event. Okay, at least I remember the name. I'm Francesco. I've been very active lately on Twitter, on YouTube, maybe a little bit too much. I blame the COVID for this. I have my friends here. 2 out of 3 of them have been on my YouTube channel. We need to fix this, Magno. And so in this live panel, we'll talk about the how to get started with containerization. So the problems. I would like to have a lot of questions because I get so many questions also on the end. Okay, this should be okay. I see something on the screen, but okay, it should work. Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Okay. So let's get started. We have 3 people, and let's start with Anais Urlichs. I don't know if I pronounced it well.
Yeah, you pronounced it right.
It was a luck, to be honest. She's a site reliability engineer at Sivo. Okay. Mm-hmm. So can you please introduce yourself, Anais?
Yeah, my name is Anais. I think I should start about a year ago when I got started with Docker and Kubernetes. Like about a year ago, I transitioned from the blockchain space, where I was working for several years, into the DevOps space. And that was the first time I was actually learning about Docker, and then also subsequently about Kubernetes. But it's just about a year ago, which is quite recent. And yeah, I just got started with my first job in the DevOps space, and then got started with Docker, and then now transitioned into site reliability engineering. And I'm really excited to be here. So if you have any questions, anything that's unclear, ask in the chat. And I also have a YouTube channel that I might be able to talk about in a bit as well.
I would have said this anyway if you have forgotten that. I've seen Anais on the last DockerCon, and now I am his host. I'm super happy.
I also bought a t-shirt right now.
I'm super jealous. Okay, now I'm jealous.
Good. That was the point.
Perfect. Magno Logan. He is an information security specialist at Trend Micro. How are you? Can you introduce yourself, please?
Good. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks for the invite. Yeah. So my name is Magno Logan. I'm originally from Brazil, but I live in Canada, and I work for Trend Micro, where I do a lot of information security research. I've been doing that for over 2 years now on cloud and container security, and my focus of my research has been on Kubernetes security as well. And prior to that, my background was on application security, and before that, I was a developer. So yeah, happy to be here.
Perfect. Thank you, Anais, for also writing this in the chat. And the last but not least, one of my best friends on Twitter, Chris Kalmar. He is a senior software engineer, contractor. He started a YouTube channel with Docker. We talk almost every day. Yeah, he has a really great background setup. He's I think the best. How are you? Please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Francesco. That was a nice introduction. So what can I add? I'm doing software development since more than 15 years, or actually I stopped counting after 15 years. I had various titles throughout the career, and recently I just started becoming a contractor again, so I get exposure to more different products and projects. And I started my Docker journey around 2014, 2015, and I can't imagine working on any software projects without Docker anymore. And yeah, as Francesco said already, I'm as well on YouTube and Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. Just one thing before we start. Since Chris is 20, he started being in development when he was 5, of course.
Exactly.
So let's get started. I have a lot of questions, but of course, feel free to drop all of them. I will try to answer them all. So the first question is the why. So why containerization? I get this question like 5 or 10 times per day. I've also made a couple of threads, very long threads on Twitter, but that doesn't help me. So please help me if you have an answer to this, a live answer to this. So why should we use the containerization? Who would like to start? Volunteers.
I can start if you want.
Perfect.
So basically, for me, it was an answer to an ongoing problem, or multiple problems actually. So over the years, I mean, before Docker, we had various issues with deploying software and with running developer environments. So everybody knows the terms when your developer, works on my machine or worked on my machine. Why doesn't it work on your machine? I don't know. So because it's impossible to have the very same environment on every setup. Everybody installs something else, has a different library and so on. And the same goes for servers, right? If you install something on a server, it was an absolute nightmare back then to get a server into a certain state that the libraries are there, the updates are all there, all the modules that you need, and the executables are there. And then it started to work, and you would spend hours to get one machine working, and then you have to go on to the next server and to the next server. So they came up with tools like Ansible, Salt and Puppet and Chef and so on that would help you enforce those environments, but still it was a lot of work. And we also had the ideas of using virtual machines, which if you don't know, it's basically an operating system inside an operating system. And the problem is that it's super heavy because it's running an operating system, so you have to boot it up. You'll wait 10, 15 seconds before it's there, so super useless. And with Docker, with containers, the things changed immediately because you still got the super nice isolation. So your software would be in an environment that you control. It would start up immediately within a fraction of a second. You get the portability, so you can install, once you have an environment that runs Docker, be it a server, any desktop, any laptop, once Docker is running there, you can immediately deploy it there. So it's really easy to use. And you get the scalability on top of it, right? So you don't have to run it once, but you can have 5 copies of it on one machine, on several machines. You can interconnect them. And those are all nice features that will simplify your whole life as a developer. You just have to define what your environment should look like. So you get to write a recipe like you would do a recipe for baking a cake. You say, I need this library, I need this environment setting, I need this operating system below it, and this is my software, build it and run it. And this is why Docker is amazing.
Yeah, I swear that if I could cook some cakes with containers, I would do that. I swear that.
It's possible.
Yeah. Welcome, Safer. Safer Mohiuddin, I don't know if I pronounced it well, more or less, is a CEO of Tiny Stacks and also an ex-AWS tech lead. Welcome. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. Sorry, guys, for the delay. We were having some networking issues at the office.
No problem. Would you like to add something, introduce yourself very fast? We have just getting started, by the way, don't worry.
Yeah, I'll just give a quick introduction. I worked at AWS for 6.5 years. My team was responsible for building all of the database, AI, and analytics services, so like RDS, DynamoDB, Redshift. And I left AWS about 9 months ago to start Tiny Stacks, where we're helping developers build backends on AWS, and you can take your Docker app and get a full backend on AWS in just a couple of clicks. And yeah, I'm excited to be here and excited to learn from all of you guys as well. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Safer. So we had this question like why containerization? Magno, would you like to answer to this? This is one of the questions that get more frequently.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, is it for me or?
I ask to Magno. Yes,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Magno.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think the first thing would be asking why not containerization, right? Why it's so much more efficient. You can have different applications running on the available, so you don't need to waste money buying different servers as well. And it's not perfect on a security perspective, but it has some boundaries. It has some security layers and things that you can implement and import there, where you can have multiple applications running on the same place, and they're kind of isolated in their own containers, right? So I would say, like, why not? And I think not just what Chris mentioned about having everything packed together in a single file or Docker image, right? Where you don't need to worry about dependencies and it runs on my machine, but also about cost optimization and security. I think that those are very important as well.
Perfect, Magno. I like this. Yeah, Anais, would you like to go first, and then Safer? Why?
Sure.
Why? People always ask me
why containerization? Why should you get started with containerization? I would actually go beyond the technical specs. So, I mean, we mentioned some of the advantages of containerization, of lightweight workload environments and spinning up multiple duplicates, replicas of your application and similar. So you have a lot of technical advantages when you use containers. But beyond that, me, for example, I don't know anything else. I don't know how to deploy an application without containerization, without Kubernetes, right? Because I'm too young to have experienced that, let's say. Like, I've only worked with companies where you're required to use, or where we just, as our workflow, we used containers. And along the entire way to test our application, to run our CI/CD pipelines and so on, right? So I don't know how to do it without. And I think that's where the industry is moving towards. So we had virtualization with virtual machines, and I've done that in my first internship. And now everything I do is based on containers and Kubernetes. And just that's, I think, a huge reason, or reason enough, to start learning about it, because that's where a lot of the companies and just workflows are moving towards. So those are the technologies that you are required to know to be effective as an engineer. That's how I would put it, or a big benefit for me. I guess.
I like this point of view. I like this. Yeah. So fair. Why? You're muted. There is always one. Okay, go.
Sorry. In my opinion, if you want your developers to be super productive, to move super fast, and be able to build out features for whatever company that you're working at, I think you have to containerize. There's no other way to be building your application, right? How many times have people had local configuration issues and all of these things, whether you're talking about just locally working with Docker or on the cloud, right? And so I don't think that there's another solution. And even if you look at the serverless movement, something like AWS Lambda has now adopted even using Docker containers, right? So you can just see that I think containerization is going to be the standard, whether regardless you're going to use serverless, whether you're going to use Kubernetes, or whether you're just going to have like a couple of containers on like ECS or something like that. And that's why I think it's so crucial to be containerized from day one, right? So you can scale easily.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So before creating this event, I just started to think about some good idea. The only one that I got is that maybe we can try to explain 4 concepts of Docker. This is not a Docker crash course. I would love to make this with all of you, but let's take all 4 of them. One can go with one, and then the other one could try to say the other one. So we would like to explain about Docker file, what is the Docker run, Docker hub, and Docker compose. So the earlier we start as more possibility, and the last one will take the last one. So would you like to go first?
I can go first.
Perfect.
Magno first.
Sure. I'll talk about Docker Hub first, because I think it's the easiest one.
Okay.
But yeah, if you have developer experience, you probably use Git and GitHub, right? Which is the repository of source code, and it has become more than that, right? It has a lot of different projects now. You can even host like books and stuff, right? Docker Hub takes a similar approach, right? You need to build our containers, but you need a centralized storage location, a place to store them, and those are called container registries, right? And this container registry is the official registry created by Docker. To everyone can use it. It's a public registry. You can store your own images. You can download from different vendors and everything, right? So it's the most famous container registry of everywhere, right? And I think it has improved a lot over the years, right? There was a lot of issues of malicious container images being hosted on Docker Hub, and you had to be careful about where you download it from, if you trust that person or not, right? And now it even has built-in scanning capabilities, right? You can have, depending on your plan that you use on Docker Hub, you can scan your own images directly on Docker Hub, so you can look for vulnerabilities and security issues as well. So yeah, I think it's a great place to start.
Yeah, perfect. Before we go on the next one, just don't download random stuff on internet. But this is not on Docker Hub. This is a common rule.
For sure.
Before Docker, of course.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Magno. This is a really great. By the way, this is not just the only registry. There is also, for example, the ACR. Your private registry. But yeah, this has been great. Thank you. Yeah. Do you now would you like to
Maybe we can expand on why you would want to go with Docker Hub, like in what cases you would choose to use Docker Hub versus hosting your containers or like pushing your containers to another registry. That might be interesting.
Nice.
The audience wants to provide some input on what you would like to know.
Do you know that I like? Yeah, I think the best compliment that I ever had on my interviews, it has been Francesco. They seems like so natural, but even if they are scripted, that they are not. So please go. Go, Anais. If you want.
Me? Should I answer that question?
Yeah, you made the question.
I asked it so somebody else can answer it. You know, I like to ask questions when I'm the panelist.
So maybe we'll just jump in. I'll try to answer it. So for me, the decision would be, if you're beginning with Docker, the most obvious choice is to use what Docker is providing you already, because you don't have to do any additional setup. Docker Hub is the main registry out of the box there already. So this is the one thing. The other thing is as well that you can use Docker Hub as well to explore a lot of options out there, because this is one of the things what I like about Docker as well, is that you get to test out different open source projects without having to git clone it, build it and run it. You can just take from Docker Hub so many ready-made projects and just see how they work, decide if you need it or not, and move on. So Docker Hub is therefore most of the time on GitHub the main registry that is used. So you will find the most projects on Docker Hub. That's why it's an easy choice. Of course, if you have other needs, or if it's about performance because you're on a different setup and you need a closer co-location, it will be a different choice. But for me, it was always Docker Hub so far.
Yeah, perfect. I think that once you get the concept, you can also use another one. For example, I'm creating a video series for AWS, and it uses ECR, and basically the concepts are almost the same. So thank you for this. Yeah. Sofer, would you like to ask to some of them, like talk about either Dockerfile or Docker Compose, the one you prefer the most, one of them?
Using Dockerfile versus Docker Compose?
Yeah, or you can just here to explain maybe to someone who's just getting started with containerization. For example, what is a Dockerfile? Even just basic definitions, maybe for someone who is listening. Thank you.
Yeah. So a Dockerfile just contains how to run the particular application, right? Like the first line is what is the base image. So it can be like Node or Python or something like that. And then all you have in the Dockerfile is like how to start up the application. So it makes standardizing starting up the application super easy. So you can say like npm run start or something like that in your Dockerfile, and that's all you need to kind of get started. We have an open source template for an Express app that has like a CRUD API, and that also works with like an AWS like database that maybe we can share afterwards, that we built, that has like a sample Dockerfile and everything like that, which I think is pretty useful. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Anais, would you like to say something about Docker Compose? For example, have you liked it since the beginning? Did it take a while to understand how it works?
You have high expectations. No. So, well, I would add to, so the thing is, I'm not using Docker Compose similar to the previous panel on a daily basis. I use it for really specific use cases. For example, so once you have the containers and you want to run them in a specific order. So for example, if two containers are dependent on each other, right? You want to have them separated, to have like separate dependencies and so on within each container, but they are in one way or another interacting, then you can use Docker Compose, as far as I know, that's my interpretation of Docker Compose, to basically run those containers in a specific order, and you can provide additional input. So for example, if those containers are dependent on environment variables or additional parameters, then you can pass them in also through Docker Compose. So you can basically specify how those containers should be run. So for example, once you build the container and then you want to run it, you can, within the command, you can specify additional parameters, right? But if I do that on my machine and then I want Francesco to run the same container in the exact same way, then I would have to give him exactly the same command, right? And it's easier for him to get something wrong if I just give him that command, right? Especially if the command is really long and has additional input and maybe additional files or whatever it is. However, if I have a Docker Compose instead, then I can specify that within the Docker Compose file. So while I, for example, use Kubernetes to spin up my containers and manage those, you can, for example, I would use Docker Compose if I want to quickly test containers and see how they run and how I can interact with them before I go through the trouble of spinning up a Kubernetes cluster and spinning up the containers as pods within that Kubernetes cluster. So in that case, for example, I would use Docker Compose. And then there are some other specific use cases where I would use Docker Compose, for example, if I want to run something locally in a specific way that does not require to be accessible through a Kubernetes cluster, for instance. That would be my definition.
Great. Yeah. Before talking about Docker Run, if you want, Chris, I can do that. I just want to point out this because I get these questions so many times, and I see sometimes people are confused because Docker Compose is actually two things. There is the Docker Compose CLI. Now there is also the version 2 with Docker space Compose, and then there is a Docker Compose file .yml. So we need to understand the difference between these two things since the beginning, because otherwise you could get confused because there is the same name, but totally two different things. Yeah.
I think this is one of the big problems for everybody starting with Docker, the terminology. There's so many words that get thrown at you. And one of the things even that I noticed is that people are using images and containers interchangeably. So it's super confusing for somebody starting out. They don't get the ideas.
Yeah, when I get this sort of stuff in tutorials, I start to flame. To be honest, I try to be calm.
But I just wanted to add something to Docker Compose because I'm a heavy user of Docker Compose actually over the last years, especially in my last company that I was working for. We had our whole developer environment in Docker Compose, and the idea was this: that each developer was working on various services, not always on all the services. So you didn't want to have every other service manually built on your machine and run it. So obviously we wanted to have Docker containers running. And what we did is that every time when we push something through the CI pipeline, at the end, a new Docker container a new Docker image would be created, and we would update automatically a main Docker Compose file, let's say like that. Okay, this was a process that we built ourselves, but in the end, we had a Docker Compose file that would be updated each time when a new Docker image is built. So whenever you wanted to update your local developer environment, it would be just pulling the newest update, and you would be able to work on the part that you're supposed to work on and have all the other services from database to caches and so on already in place, which made our developer life super simple because we didn't have to take care of all the configuration. It was already there. So for this, Docker Compose is amazingly good.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. So we miss one, but I'd like to come back to Magno because he made an amazing job for Docker Hub. Thank you so much. So about Docker Run, how can we explain this command, which seems easy, but maybe understand maybe what there is behind that? Also, how can we explain this, for example, for a beginner? What does this command do?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's one of the basic commands that you use for Docker for starting your images, right? Start your containers there, and it's all about like once you understand that containers are just files or just like tarballs of files, then and you understand how it's like how it's compounding that together to run your containers, to run your it's a process, right? It's just a process that's isolated in a location using the same kernel of your operating system, and it's you run your image there in an isolated way, right? So usually when we talk about Docker, and we usually like to mention, okay, it's CH root on steroids, right? It's creating a location on your computer where you can run that process isolated from other things. So I think that would be my explanation there.
Nice. Magno, do you have a YouTube channel or not?
I do have a channel on YouTube. I'm not very like a frequent.
You should. You're
poster.
great. You're great at explaining things. I will convince you.
Thank you.
You can become a guest on my YouTube channel to have more videos there.
But
I invite you.
Of course, first on my YouTube channel and then on yours. Wait your turn.
Yeah. If anyone likes security stuff, I do run a monthly challenge CTF live on Twitch. So we have a channel called UHC, Ultimate Hacking Championship, where we have like people that participate and try some challenges. And we had some Docker and Kubernetes challenges before where they try to hack into some applications. So I can share that later.
Nice, for sure. Yeah, now let's go back on the main topic. Sorry for this off topic, but it's super interesting. I have a question for Safer. So, what do you use to deploy containers? Yeah, I think this is the right person to ask this.
There's 17 different ways to deploy a container on AWS. I don't know if you guys have seen that GIF before.
We have just 20 minutes, so yeah.
It's ridiculous. So what we use internally and for our customers is ECS. It's Elastic Container Service. It's for free that you can use on top of EC2 and quickly allows you to spin up an instance. And in ECS, you have two options. One is called Fargate and one is called EC2. Fargate requires less configuration, but it's about 40% more expensive. So actually yesterday we announced that we moved all of our customers to EC2. You have to configure it a little more, but we automatically do that for our customers. And there's several other ways, like I mentioned earlier in the call, even Lambda now has support for where you can add your container and use that. And then there's several of other different AWS services. But that's a good question.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So okay. So another question. Let's see. Which advice would you give to people who want to deploy their containers? We can start with you, Safer. Maybe I know your answer, and then of course we can give other answers if you want. Because I think sorry, I just want to say that you have your local environment. You understand how to containerize your application, but then maybe you want to try something in production. So this is an important step. Yeah.
Well, I want to hear from other people first of how they deploy.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So wait your turn. Yeah.
I don't want to spoil the fun.
Yeah. Anyone else would like to start?
So maybe one of the most important, crucial things with Docker images is that you should understand exactly what you're deploying before you are actually deploying. Because deploying is, for the ones, it's Docker Compose in a simple setup. It could be a Docker Swarm setup as well, or Kubernetes, which is then the masterclass of things. But in order to get there, you have to understand exactly what you're deploying. One of the key concepts of Docker for me that I took on for quite some time now is immutable infrastructure, immutable containers. So I saw often that people would use Docker containers like a base image. It's source code from a GitHub repository, which makes the container not really easy to move to another setup and so on. So this is something that you don't want to do. Another thing that I saw as well is that people would build some kind of container and mount in some things as well into it, but do still changes later on. So you would never be sure what's actually running on the server. So what you want to do is every commit that you push to GitHub would, in the best case, would create a new image, a Docker image. So it's not like you shouldn't build too many images because you have to save space or something like this. You always should build a new image. So each image should get its own tag. And this is another thing that happens quite often is with beginners, that they are using the latest tag, right? So you can tag every image that you have. And if you use latest, it will be the problem that you will always overwrite the same Docker image regardless what you are building. And after 2 weeks, you have a completely different version running there and you have no clue what's going on. So what I would suggest is you have some automated way, like a CI pipeline, that you control exactly how you build your containers or your images and how you label them. And one of the tricks that I was using always is using the build number, because it's a sequential number, so you know in history when you build it, and attach it with eight characters from the GitHub commit hash, right? So you can immediately copy it and use it in your Git log and find out exactly which version you deployed, even if it's just a developer version. Of course, you can go with sim versioning and things like that, but you need to understand exactly what's running. So not using latest or having a specific way of how you name and label your images is very crucial. Without it, you can't really think seriously about deploying containers. This is one of the things that I would suggest.
I agree with that. Chris, you also avoid getting a lot of dangling images on your machine. Like the first time I was like doing this like for 3 days, and after that I did Docker images. I got like 100 dangling images.
Docker system prune and
yeah, of course. And then I had to check that. So yeah, thank you, Anais. What do you use?
What do I use? I use Kubernetes for everything, which is dependent on my job. So it's not like per choice. If I have a simple web application, I wouldn't necessarily use Kubernetes. However, with Kubernetes, it makes it very easy once you get started to manage and scale your containers, your applications within your Kubernetes cluster, and also use existing cloud-native Kubernetes-based applications in combination with your application. So it allows you to access a lot of functionality that you wouldn't have if you're not using Kubernetes. And then there are also, you would want to use Kubernetes if you want to either scale a lot your use of containers, or if it's just something you want to maybe play around with, then I think that's also great. And if you just want to deploy a container, then I would use, I guess, specific applications that are built on Kubernetes, where I just have to provide the container and they basically, as a platform, they manage it for me, or they spin it up for me, so I don't have to be the one who's creating the YAML files to deploy the containers. There's also a question in the chat of why would you use Docker Swarm over Kubernetes or vice versa. No, I have never used Docker Swarm. Primarily because when I got started a year ago in the space with those tools, it was just by default, Kubernetes was what the companies and the projects were using. And when I got started within the CNCF as ambassador and so on, that's just, everything is based on Kubernetes. So that's just what I went with. There are probably reasons why you want to use Docker Swarm. It's just my preference, I guess, in this case, and from a lot of people in the industry.
Perfect. Yeah, of course. Magno, have I asked to you or not? Have you already asked to this or not? Still not. Can't remember.
I don't think
My memory is that bad. Yeah. Go please.
So like Anais mentioned, I started my container journey with only Docker, and then right after that I moved to Kubernetes and deploying that, especially because when I start working at my current company at Trend Micro, I was supporting their container image scanning solution to scan images for vulnerabilities, and the product ran on a Kubernetes cluster already, so I had to learn Kubernetes, right? I was kind of forced to learn that. But yeah, I did look at other container orchestration tools such as Docker Swarm and like Apache Mesos and OpenShift, which is basically Kubernetes for enterprise, right? And it's like yeah, they have some differences and some benefits between each other. Like someone mentioned in the chat, right? Docker Swarm, it seems a kind of simpler to learn and understand the concepts. It doesn't have a lot of like configurations and a lot of new concepts such as Kubernetes. Like I had such a hard time in the beginning to understand like how is this happening, right? What's going on in the background that's making this all these components of Kubernetes, API server and scheduler and controller manager. What are they doing, right? And so I think for someone starting, maybe a easier container orchestration might be ideal. But yeah, for Kubernetes has dominated the market, I think, and for from like a job perspective, and if you're looking for a position in that area as a DevOps engineer or cloud engineer, then you have to learn Kubernetes. There is no way around it.
Perfect, thank you, Magno. So we are back, Safer. So we asked all of them their ideas, of course, great ideas. So which advice would you give you to people who would like to deploy their containers? And we can talk about Docker or Kubernetes, but also about service providers, of course. Since you have worked in AWS, maybe you know a couple of things. For how many years?
Yeah.
6.
6.5.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think what Chris said is really important regarding the tags. And also one thing I would add is you can always have multiple tags on an image too, right? So you can have custom tags for like a commit ID or like a dev stage, but you can also say that this is the latest one, and you can change that. So I think that's something that we do. I haven't played around too much with Kubernetes yet, so I'm the noob on the panel, but I will be. It's actually kind of crazy. We used a lot of serverless at Amazon internally, which almost nobody uses outside. So that's kind of interesting. But I think there's a lot of solutions that can help you through the process. I think Chris talked about the first portion, which is like creating your Docker image, right? Which is, I like to say, it's like a zip file basically of your application, right? And the Docker file is basically the file that tells you, hey, run my application like this, right? That's the first part. Then the second part is like, how do you build your Docker image? Well, it's a pretty simple Docker command that you have to run, but where does that command live? So it can live on any like CI/CD solution. It can live on like GitHub Actions. It can live on like Amazon Code Build. It can live on any of these other type of CI/CD services like Circle CI and stuff like that. That's like stage 2, right? Then stage 3 is the release part. Well, how do you deploy this container onto your host, and how do you do it in a way that's seamless? You don't want to be taking down your application, right? You need to deploy it seamlessly. So you really need to deploy like another host, and then have it gradually take over on the new code, right? And then the fourth stage would be like, how do you scale that application? Like, how many hosts is this Docker image deployed on, and stuff like that. So we found this problem to be extremely complicated, which is why we built a solution for it with TinyStacks, which is, imagine it's Netlify or Vercel for backends, right? And right now we exclusively support Docker, where you can take your GitHub code and it will create a CI/CD pipeline for you and all of the infrastructure that you need on AWS and manage that process for you. Otherwise, there's so many different components that people end up more time on that than their application, right? So we want to bring back coding to people's application. But there's so many solutions out there that you can use, and depending on what your company uses or what you might already been using, then that's always obviously the preferred route.
Thank you so much, Safer. I think you have some connection issues, but still better than the last one. So don't worry. Maybe you can deactivate your camera when you're speaking, but okay, yeah, I don't want to. Yeah. So
I just wanted to add one more thing. I mean,
Yeah,
it sounds
sure.
pretty cool. I'll have to check out TinyStacks. It sounds pretty amazing, so I'll give it a go. But what I wanted to add as well, a very important part of using Docker images is as well starts in the software. What you should think of is not to hard code any networking setup or configuration like this. Use Docker Compose, Kubernetes, whatever you'll use in the end. Use it to your advantage. Remove this out of this. Make the software in a way that it will not know what the environment looks like. And later on, if you move on to Kubernetes or something like this, you can use a service mesh, which are small sidecar containers that will take care of all the networking for you, for example. So the software, each container or each image doesn't need to know about its surroundings, which makes scaling so much easier.
Yeah, I love this definition, Chris. Thank you so much. You're great at giving answers. Yeah. Perfect. So before leaving, I would like to check if you have some questions. There is one question I can answer to this. It says that are these workshop panels recorded and where can I find them? I don't know where you can find them, but I think somewhere around here. Just a little bit self-promotion. If I have time, I'll take these 2 videos and I'll try to get the best out of them and I'll put them maybe on my channel, or I don't know. So I like to make these highlights like in a game. Yeah, and of course in that case I'll put all the links of the people who have been our guests on my YouTube channel. But yeah, enough with my self-promotion. So we have some questions like if each Git commit of the junior developer will be an image tag. How can I handle semantic version? My registry will fill with a lot of tags, said Face.
Well, when I mentioned this example, it was not like every commit, every push that you would do, for example. So every time when you would, for example, finish a feature branch, you would push the whole thing. So this new feature branch would end up as in a Docker image. But it's up to you how you want to do it. So if you have something like a Git flow and you have semantic versioning going on, then you will generate those kind of tags. So it's really depending on the problem that you're trying to solve. Sometimes it might be really like every commit.
Yeah, and also I think there are different approaches on Git and GitHub. There are some people who just commit all day long. Maybe people might just make one commit. Maybe they squash that. So I think it also depends on I don't know if there are some standard line guidelines, but I think it's more it's more up to the developer. Yeah, someone else would like to add something to this to handle semantic version.
I would actually use the CI/CD platform to handle the versioning. So it's automatically you can have you can find scripts online that basically will update your versioning and make it extra easy. That's at least how I do it in many cases.
Okay, but which script? Because this is
there's some bash scripts that you can then call the file and just run it, and it will update the version. It will provide you with a new version. That's how. Or there are also some CLI tools that you can use. Like depending on your environment, your setup, there are different tools that you can use to then have it updated. It's really specific to you.
No,
I would say, but I would automate that.
It absolutely has to be automated. So you shouldn't manually push any Docker images from your machine, because this will just at some point cause problems, because you have something there what others don't have. Have a CI pipeline for sure. This is an important thing. And there's so much choice already out there. And if you use semantic versioning, or if you use a build number, or if a commit hash, it's really up to you.
Yeah. I agree with both of you. Maybe I can just add that we should automate everything, but also understand what's going on. So you should not just create a pipeline without even knowing the difference between an image and a container. So I think it's important to understand what's going on, and then you can make use, of course, on every automation.
Yeah, I just would like.
Sure.
Just would like to add that, of course, I totally agree here with the CI/CD tools and pipeline, but just be aware of which tool are you using and how you're protecting that pipeline as well, right? Because that pipeline is going to have a lot of permissions on your environment, and if that tool is compromised, then your whole environment is compromised, right? We all remember the recent case of the SolarWinds attack and Microsoft as well recently. So I think that's a good point to understand, right? Supply chain attacks are increasing, and so being aware of that and protecting not just your production environment, but your pipeline and your dev environment. That's very important.
It's a very valid point, and I think what you can do is you can look up what other open source projects are doing, so you can get some sort of a blueprint and see what they thought of, what you didn't maybe, and this will help you to have some baseline of security, because so many eyeballs looked at it already, right?
Yeah, perfect. So we have 2 minutes left. I'd like to give you the opportunity just to say, where can we find you? Maybe just leave a very fast final message. Would like to go first? Nice.
Okay. You can find everything on my Twitter. I'm going to post the handle in the chat. And you can find my YouTube channel there, where I post mainly Kubernetes tutorials and getting started tutorials. And I also have a weekly DevOps newsletter where I share content from across the space from all levels. So sign up to that if you are interested in DevOps and Docker and containers and Kubernetes and everything in between. And I just want to say as a final word, I guess, to while a lot of those things can seem scary, and it's sometimes like you operate a black box when you use Docker or other tools, right? I just suggest everybody to just get started with anything. Like when you want to learn about Docker and containerization, look for tutorials, look for Google Docker beginner tutorials, and you can find an amazing list of beginner tutorials, and just try to replicate those and see also if you're unsure if those are good tutorials, then Google the person's name, and maybe if they're Docker captains, then you could replicate their tutorials and place higher reliability, like credibility on them, and just get started with anything, because a lot of times I get questions of like, where do I get started? What tutorials should I use? What tools should I use? And it doesn't matter so much what you get started with, but that you just try something out. Just Google anything and try it out. And from there, you will start learning more about it. Yeah.
Perfect.
And thank you for having me. That was great.
Yeah. Chris, what about you?
Okay. I just wanted to add about starting with Docker, which are all very valid points that Anais said. But most of all, if you think you're overwhelmed with Docker itself, just start as a user. You don't have to build your first images right away. Just use it to run a Postgres container or some other database or any service or a dashboard. Pick any project that you would like to try with running it locally, and try to see how Docker behaves and what it does, and start from there. And YouTube is a great source as well for getting a lot of tutorials. And you can find me on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on Twitter. But most of the time, you will find me on Twitter.
I've just posted his YouTube channel. Yeah. So.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. The advantage of being my guest on the second panel is that now I understand how things work, and I can put the audience. Sorry for the first panel, but I missed that. Yeah. Magno, can we go with you? I posted your Twitter handle. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. It was great to join this panel here. You can find me mostly on Twitter or LinkedIn. That's where I'm very open and available if you need to chat. If you have any other questions on Twitter, I try to post more information security related, container, cloud security, Kubernetes security as well. And I also would like to do a shameless plug where I have this GitHub project that's called the Awesome Kubernetes Security List. So it has a lot of links and talks and papers and even Kubernetes container and Kubernetes security books as well. It's all listed there. So feel free to star and share and fork it. And if you have any other links that are not there, feel free to submit a PR and I'll be glad to take a look. So thank you.
Yeah, so sometimes I post some links of free open source project. I could have posted this link without knowing that was you, Magno, because I think I can remember something like that. Now I can't remember the exact moment. Safar, what about you? Where can we find you? And let me put this link, which is www.tinystacks.com.
I just checked out the K security repository, Magno, and it looks really good. Thanks for putting that together. I'm not as popular as you guys on Twitter, but follow Francesco instead of me, But you can find our website, tinystacks.com. And yeah. And I shared the GitHub repository where we have the template and the sample Docker file. So it's easy to kind of get started.
Yeah, perfect. Safar. I've also shared the link. So thank you. I'm just a couple of minutes later. I don't know if William is lurking in the darkness, but thank you so much for being here. This has been really, there we go.
Lurking.
There we go.
Lurking
Always lurking.
all
It's
channels.
like on social media. Yeah, you're always there. William, I'm done. Yeah.
Thank
go
you.
for that.
Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Francesco. Really, this was awesome. It's amazing that we still have so many people tuned in. Everyone's exhausted, and it's getting late on this side of the Atlantic, but really, I want to thank everyone. It's been great. This is all recorded, of course, so all the content across all the sessions are recorded. We'll be sharing it on our YouTube channel sometime next week. So thanks again.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, William.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
See you.
Bye. Thank you.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.